Welcome. My name is Maria Turnbull. I am Associate Executive Director here at Vantage Point. Very happy to see so many folks here for our support to the PLEO team, Pacific Legal Education and Outreach team, to share with us news of the Law for Nonprofits new tool, Legal Help at Your Fingertips. Before we dive in, I want to acknowledge I'm connecting in this afternoon from the Vantage Point offices. We are located on the unceded and stolen lands of the Coast Salish peoples, that of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Very grateful to be doing this work within our Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities with the land that's been cared for so well by these nations. I have the privilege of welcoming in the PLEO team, Martha and Carol, both joining us today for this work. I've been with Vantage Point a very long journey and have worked with Martha for a good portion of that journey, and so appreciate all opportunities to leverage and support the expertise that this team brings to our sector and how critical it is. Many of you will already know Vantage Point. Very briefly, we are on a mission to support nonprofit organizations around this province through educational programs, as well as other consulting supports, and in the areas of expertise of governance, leadership, planning, and people. And please, if you're in need of a resource as a nonprofit leader, please let us know what that is. If you can't find it on our website, we'll be happy to hear what you're struggling with and how we might support. As I mentioned, we're really here, the main event, our team at PLEO, Martha Rands, the founder and legal director of Law for Nonprofits, and Carol Pakkala, legal content lead with Law for Nonprofits. And really this is what it's all about today. So an introduction to this incredible resource that is now available, an initiative of PLEO, and Martha will take it from here. I'll be here to moderate Q&A as we get a little closer to that point, but you'll see have Martha share some context and kind of how we got here, what's to be excited about, and then Carol will be walking through some of the utility of the tool so you can actually check it out and begin to understand how it might be relevant to you in your work. Before I hand things to you, Martha, a quick note that we are recording the session, as with all of the other PLEO Lunch and Learns that have been offered. It will be available on the PLEO website some point following the session. If you have any concerns, please do let me know. As I mentioned, the closed captioning has been enabled. If you'd like to turn that off, you can do so in your Zoom options. I will be doing my very best to monitor the chat of this large group. So again, patience with any responses, and know that I'll be taking note of key questions. Assuming we can get to them all within the session, we'll do so. And if not, I'll be sure to park what doesn't get picked up and collaborate with Martha and Carol behind the scenes to get responses as appropriate. Martha, over to you. I'll stop my screen share.
Wow. Thanks, Maria. And yes, we have known each other a while. In fact, this formerly known as the legal self-assessment tool began with a conversation that I had with a funder, where a funder asked me, how could a tool be developed that could help them to ensure that the folks that they're funding are legally compliant. And this came up in the context of a couple of very high profile insolvencies in the arts. So it wasn't directed at sort of with a nagging finger. It was directed primarily so that perhaps they could be preventative at some measure. This led to a conversation with Alison Bruin, who I had met many years ago around at various nonprofit events. I think it was actually Imagine Canada's BC Roundtable back in the pre-pandemic days. And she and I set to work. We did a series of workshops together, and that enabled us to gather a lot of information from folks of what their needs were. And then we were able to we gathered together a bunch of lawyers and started work on what was then in the form of a survey monkey, if you can believe it. And in that, we got a grant from the City of Vancouver and Van City Community Foundation and did the first iteration. And we piloted it with, among others, the then ED of Vantage Point, whose name escapes me, but it was after Colleen Kelly in any case. So Vantage Point, all of which is to say that Vantage Point in some measure has had a role in our work since the beginning of this, which started around 2014, 2012, 2014. Denise Baker, that's right. Unfortunately, the funding changed. We thought we would then be able to create a digital tool from this survey monkey, but that wasn't to happen. The idea for the program changed to design charrettes for reasons which are somewhat elusive. In any event, fast forward to 2019, PLEO received a grant from the Canada Council for the Arts with a partner, Dance in BC, Made in BC, and we began work on a prototype with the students at the Center for Digital Media. That is where we developed a lot of the look and feel of the site, because it's very important to people as we reviewed all of the existing such platforms across Canada and into Europe, that the user experience is really critical. So we ended up with the prototype and then sought further funding from the Canada Council for the Arts Digital Strategy Fund in our own right, and with and Vancouver Foundation. And we were successful under the Systems Change program and have since been working away on this digital platform. And we will, do you want to share your screen, Carol? And the homepage, which is what you're looking at, is shows us that we have 4 different areas of law covered. That's on the top of the page: Societies Act, record keeping, privacy, and employment. And then we can go into the content. The purpose of this exercise of creating the legal help at your fingertips, law for nonprofits, self-help, legal help guides, is to prevent problems. It's to prevent you needing lawyers. It's to prevent walking into a situation where a little bit of information can go a long way. And for any of you that know me, you know that I've been committed to that aspiration since we started the Pacific Legal Education and Outreach Society. So without further ado, Carol Pakkala, our extraordinary legal content lead, is going to walk us through 2 modules of content. I can answer questions, just put them in the chat. I'd also love to know from people where you're coming from, particularly cities and provinces. If any of you are from outside of BC. And I should mention that for those of you who may be from outside BC, the content, while it's intended for BC's nonprofits that are incorporated under the Societies Act, a lot of the information is generic insofar as these are legal principles that apply across the country in most provincial employment, privacy, and constating statutes. So over to you, Carol.
Thanks, Martha. Can everybody see and hear me okay? I guess I'll rely on Maria to tell me that. I don't have the video up. Let me just make sure.
Yep, that's looking great.
Okay, good. So this is what we're here to talk about. And up here in the corner, you can see the address for it. It's LawForNonProfits.ca. So we just actually recently went live. We're very happy with how it's looking. But if you do encounter any problems with it, please let us know. We can circulate the email addresses afterwards. But if you send an email to me, if you've noticed anything that's not working properly, because it has just been released to the public. So it is available to anybody to use. So if you see, this is the home page, and right here at the top, you can see the 4 modules that are currently on there. The plan is to hopefully build at least 1, maybe 2 more modules. And at the top here, you'll also see that there's a glossary, and I'll just click on that really quickly, which it's alphabetical, and it gives you definitions that are referred to throughout the content on the website. So there's little videos for each module. This video tells you everything that you're going to be able to find on the website in terms of what the resources are. And then there's a video for each of the modules that will tell you a bit more about those. So the sort of the crowning feature of this website is these legal help guides. That's where everything started, and everything else has been developed in conjunction with these legal help guides. So on the left here, for each of the topic areas, you'll see that I'm in record keeping right now. For each of the topic areas, you'll have these consistent things. So you'll have the legal help guides, which I'm going to walk you through. And then you also have fact sheets, frequently asked questions, sample documents. Those aren't meant to be template documents currently, although that's in the works possibly as well. And then there's helpful links on that subject area. So right now we're looking at the record keeping area. So this is the legal help guide for that. And you'll see that there's a number of different ones. So if you have a question about financial records, you can start that guide, or I'm just going to start at the top here. So if we click on this, keeping official records, it'll take you to the guide itself. So it'll ask you some preliminary questions because you might realize that you're in the wrong assessment and you want to get out. So you might say, no, I don't want to be here, and it'll let you exit. But if you do want to be there, then you just say yes, and then you'll be asked a series of questions. So here you'll see the first question, whether or not you know which records are official records. And if you click on this little arrow here, it'll give you a hint as to what the official records are and a link into the Act itself, the section of the Act that defines it. And so if you say no, you'll notice on the left-hand side here, a list is going to start to populate. And that list is differentiated in terms of colors by red and yellow. Yellow meaning it's not as urgent to do, but you should still do it. Red meaning you should do something right away. So if I'm just going to continue through, and I don't have my visual up to let me know if anybody's flagging me to slow down or anything. So hopefully Maria will pop in with
I
audio.
will do. I'll be
Thank
sure
you.
to, Carol.
Okay, awesome. So here's the, again, we have a hint that tells you what keep means in terms of keeping records. That's basically, we're talking about how the format of the records and how you store them. So for the most part, let's say we have a mix. Some are paper, some are digital. So again, you'll see another hint has popped up over here on the side. And at the end, this is going to print out as well. And so then another question, does it have a designated folder? We'll say no. So you'll see now we have a red flagged item, which means you need to do something right away. And the purpose of this demonstration is just so you see how it works, not so much to grasp the actual content within this guide. I'm just going to move through it. So we'll say no. And then again, showing you the definition. Let's try an I'm not sure. So you'll see it's been added to the list on the left-hand side there to ensure that it's in the proper folder. And now we're asking about bylaws. So we'll say yes, so that we don't have anything generated. And then at the end of each of the guides, you'll have this option to view your results. And then at the top here, you'll see you have the option to save it as a PDF, to email it, or to print it. So you'll have the handy list right there, and you can print that out. So that gives you more information. And then if you're confused about any of that, you can certainly go back, and you can go back by using the back button, or you can go back by clicking on the module again. So perhaps you're interested in getting more detailed information about official records. So I'm going to click back on there. And if you go here to the fact sheets, you'll see, oh, well, there's a fact sheet on official records. So, and then this one gives you the option to download as well. So that's just a bit of a touch on the record keeping one. If I show you just a little bit in the privacy area, again, same thing. For each of the modules, you have the guides, which are how the whole project started, and then the supplemental resources on the side here. So if we start with the privacy policy, so again, just making sure you're in the right place is the first question. And then you'll have, again, the hints, tells you what it is. There have been some scrolling issues. I see that it's happening here, and that's just because of the screen space that's available. I'll close that off. So we'll say, no, we don't have a privacy policy. So it's going to tell you need to do that, and you'll know by the fact that it's red that you need to do it. That should be a priority for you right away. And again, I'm just going to click through just so you can see how it's working. And again, definitions there. So the definitions that you find in the hints, you can also find in that glossary I showed you at the beginning. So again, the questions aren't that important. It's more just so that you can see how the guides are working. And again, so we're done. And then we say view my results. And now you have your to-do list that's broken up into the red, let's do it right away, and the yellow, stuff that you can do later, but you have your list to go away with. And then again, you can go back to that's just how I prefer to click through things, but you can go using the back button as well. And again, this time I'll show you frequently asked questions in the area of privacy. So here we have, what is a privacy officer? So these are questions that we've seen a lot of at PLEO. So we've chosen to use those as the frequently asked questions. And then just so you can see, we have helpful links. So for example, this is an important resource for anybody dealing with privacy issues. So it takes you right to that website. And then one other thing I haven't shown. So sample documents, for example, that's a sample privacy policy. And I think certainly I'm willing to answer any questions people have about
Carol, I've got,
show them. Yep.
Yeah, I've got a few for you.
Okay.
So one is to triple check I was correct, and I've given a response, but this is BC specific to Societies Act, at least
yes.
for. Yeah.
The Societies Act is BC specific. The principles of the other topic areas are generally more, well, yes, it's BC specific is the short answer.
Okay. Martha.
Yeah. There the Societies Act that exists in other jurisdictions, like the Ontario Nonprofit and Corporations Act, or Alberta, Yukon has a Societies Act, are very similar. So in terms of the principles, like say around how you need to read your bylaws, you need to know where they are, you need to know what matters. These are all principles that could be applied. It is the one module, the Societies Act module, where and the record keeping requirements are, as far as I'm aware, singular to the Societies Act. At the same time, you're not going to be offside anybody or anything by, for example, going through the record keeping, because one of the key things about record keeping is to know how to keep stuff. And even if there are some differences in your jurisdiction, some of the best practices are across, they cross provincial boundaries. And that's certainly the case with privacy. Our BC Personal Information and Privacy Act is based on the federal Personal Information and Privacy PIPEDA, EDA, Electronic Documents Act. I think 3 or 4 provinces have their own privacy pieces of privacy legislation in the private sector. They all mirror PIPEDA, including BC's. So, and again, we focus very much on the principles, like what is personal information. That is not going to be different in Ontario, say, or Manitoba than it is here. These concepts are applicable across the country. As well with employment, the BC Employment Standards Act has many similarities to employment standards acts in other jurisdictions. Where you would see the differences, say with Ontario, is what the actual employment standards branch does with a complaint. That's a whole different, that could be the difference. However, we don't deal with it. What we're talking about in this module is primarily the difference between an employee and a contractor, which is governed by the Income Tax Act, EI, as well. The 5 pieces of legislation are consistent. It's the 4-fold test, and you will learn about the 4-fold test through this module. So it wasn't developed to get into legal advice either. It's legal information, hence why it's fairly generic.
Thanks, Martha.
Yeah.
Just a quick follow-up regards to that jurisdiction question. Somebody asking if you are also a registered charity. The question is, am I correct in assuming solely BC specific and compliance related to charitable status is not addressed in the tool?
First of all, as a registered charity, you are expected to comply with your provincial legislation. So these are all issues that are fundamental to your nonprofit, which I presume you are, and then you registered for charitable status. We did in the original LSAT and LSALT, not the LSALT, but the legal self-assessment tool, include a survey on CRA compliance, and we are looking at it now. We are likely to add 2 modules of content in the next period of development, which goes until the end of March 2024. One is human rights. The other is some basics around CRA compliance. If you are interested or need access to a really good site on CRA compliance, I recommend charitycentral.ca.
Okay, some additional questions. I'll leave Martha, Carol, feel free to jump in, whoever is best to respond. Do you have sample privacy policies for agencies to use as a guide?
Yes, the sample document, the privacy policy preview here. And it's what the purpose of this particular policy that we've put up is primarily to guide you around the basics. It is, and my adage, which is KISS, which is keep it simple, Sam. So keep it simple. Like, you do not need pages of explanation of each of the privacy principles, which is a common part of many overthought privacy policies. And the main thing about this privacy policy is it answers the questions that you're going to need to have an answer to in the event that somebody were to request to the personal information that is within the control of the society or the nonprofit. So, there could be particularities to some nonprofits where this would not be appropriate or where it would need more. And, in a perfect world, you'd be able to take a version to some form of a legal information provider and get answers to specific questions. And we're looking at that for down the road.
Thanks, Martha. Confirming this is a free resource.
Yes.
I see Carol nodding her head. Yep.
Yes, it is. Yes, it's publicly available now.
Yes, and we have no intention of monetizing it, though if there are any interested folks in other jurisdictions, we are we are interested in licensing the software so that it could be used by others, because we think it's pretty good and easy to use.
Absolutely. So, Martha, on a little bit connected with that is sort of the business model or revenue model behind keeping this going. So the question is from one of our participants: is there funding in place to enable this site to continue and be updated as needed?
Oh, Janet. I wish I could say absolutely yes. Is there anyone in this room who could say that they have everything they need to continue in over the next 5 years? So the answer, unfortunately, is no. We are continuing to meet with government. I made an appearance before the parliamentary committee on the budget around the digital innovations that are going on in the nonprofit sector. We are hopefully meeting with the Minister of Innovation, Brenda Bailey, in the not too distant future. If you have any ideas on how we make this happen, I am all ears. So we are also exploring ongoing collaborations with nonprofit partners across BC and elsewhere to continue the work, because this is not intended to be a proprietary system per se. It's intended to be something that would be useful for as long as it can be, until there is sufficient capability in likely artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, to ensure it doesn't hallucinate. But that is, we're actually many, many years away from that.
Thanks, Martha. The next question, does the tool cover FOIPA? A nonprofit delivering on a government contract has to follow FOIPA also in relation to those government contracts. And I'll let you answer, and also to say that I'll put in the chat a resource that I happened to find via Google that looks like a training resource on assuring alignment with FOIPA. If that's a complementary resource, I'd be keen to know your thoughts on that, Martha.
Yep. Happy to look at what the resource is that is that you think is good, because some of the stuff is
looks like it's a government specific one, mytrainingbc.ca.
I'll have a look at it.
Okay.
We talked about this initially. There are some really good resources at the Office of the Information and Privacy Commissioner. And as with anything, when you have a specific question and you're unsure how to answer it from someone related to privacy, this should be your first stop. They have tremendous information staff, and they will answer very specific questions like, is our employees' information about X their personal information, or should we be retaining it? Also, if you're working in an organization that's under contract to the government, they will have in the ministry, for example, Ministry of Children and Families, dedicated privacy staff within the ministry. And I encourage you to canvass with them what their expectations are vis-a-vis FIPA, because in actual fact, as I participated, I wrote a study on this with the advent of digital information keeping by social service agencies. And one of the things that became really clear is that while the government puts this in their contract, they need to really drill down. You need to drill down on what exactly they are expecting. They may or may not be expecting all of the personal information that a client has provided. In either case, I'm sure, particularly if you're accredited, which you're more than likely are because you're a government, a recipient of those government contracts, you already have in place a very robust consent for the sharing of that personal information with government. So that's the rationale between not doing this. And there's, the OIPC has done, it's the bread and butter of the OIPC is the public bodies, the application of privacy rules to public bodies as opposed to private ones, which are nonprofits. So the bad news is you're kind of having to do both. But they have very distinct purposes.
Thanks, Martha. Another question: if the nonprofit has staff, there are some basic WCB requirements as well, like harassment and bullying policy. It's not so much a question as a statement. To what extent would WCB requirements, things like harassment and bullying policies, be covered? I'm turning it into a question.
I can answer that, Martha, if
yes,
you'd like.
Thank you.
So,
thanks, Tara.
So basically, we touch on it briefly, the important in both the fact sheets and the guides, it's sort of woven throughout the content, but we talk about the need for having policies to deal with those types of working conditions. So I think it's been a while. Let me just check. This might be where we're talking about.
Yeah.
So we talk about, well, that might not be it. It might have been
Oh,
one
it's
more.
there.
Oh yeah, there it is. Yeah, the
Yeah.
workplace policies and the importance of having them. So again, in really general terms, and these questions would be part of the guides as well in terms of what you have in place for your particular nonprofit. So the short answer is yes, it is touched upon.
Do we have a link to WCB's sample policy?
Sorry, to the.
I have a feeling it's not there. Well, there's HR intervals, which is Imagine Canada. But yeah, I don't think so. Look at sexual harassment and misconduct.
I can't recall off the top of my head where we put it, but
Yeah.
this is the this is the webinar.
Yeah, this is
The
the
legal
webinar.
lunch and learn.
Yeah. So, by the way, on the courthouse library's website, and maybe we could look for this to send people. Kevin Fox, who is counsel at WorkSafe BC, did a module of training for the lawyers participating in the sexual harassment and legal clinic, basically, which is at CLASS, the Community Legal Assistance Society. And it's a really good webinar. He explains exactly what WCB rules require and don't require. And actually, if you're interested in this area, that suite of training videos or training webinars are all available for free on the Courthouse Library's website. And we'll send out a link because it's a really good, it is a really good series of talks. It's very legalistic because they're all lawyers, but they're an hour. So, you can at least get a flavor directly from the WCB on how they approach this. And they have sample policies. And for what it's worth, if you're worried that your policy doesn't conform to WorkSafe's requirements, you can always ask them to review it and they will give you feedback. So, and recently we went through it, and I know of another nonprofit that did have its policies reviewed, and they were lawyer created. And the WCB said there were things in there that they wanted changed. So, yay, found them. Courthouse Libraries rocks. Yay.
Thanks, Martha. And we'll roll these up into a follow-up email. I might run it by you, or we'll run it by you first, PLEO team, to make sure we've got all the right ones that have come up today, and anything else you would suggest as complementary. I think I've covered all the questions that have come in so far. And I've been tallying sort of responses in terms of location of participants. So if you haven't already indicated that in the chat, feel free to do so. Just sort of a rough poll on where people are connecting in from, as well as any priorities you have for this tool, or possibly things that currently are not available through the tool, but in terms of your legal issue priorities, your legal needs. Really appreciate, Martha, you emphasizing the fact that this is legal information versus legal advice. I think that as a key message is an important one to highlight, as well as what I've heard so far from you around the principles that, yes, can certainly extend to requirements of nonprofits that may go beyond BC specific borders. I'm curious, I have a question of my own, which is about as people are sort of getting in, actually using the tool, is there any process that you would want to articulate regards to, we found something that's broken, or here's something I couldn't get I didn't get to an answer on. Do you want that kind of feedback, I guess? And what would be the process for that feedback loop?
Absolutely. Carol, this is your court.
Yes, that would be, you can send them to me. So we'll include my email address in the summary email that Maria sends out.
Yeah. And any feedback at all is really helpful. Also, user experience, do you like the way it looks? Do you think that it needs some work, or would like something different? Also, what are your priorities? We did a piece of research which is on the Pacific Legal Education, Pacific Legal Outreach website in 2014, which was a review both of all of the resources, believe it or not, available to nonprofits in all of these areas of law, read by yours truly. It also included 2 surveys, one of the sector in terms of its legal priorities, and one of lawyers. And it might be interesting for you to know that the sector had employment at the top of the list, not surprisingly, followed by privacy, as I recall, whereas the lawyers had Societies Act and Governance at the top of their list. And one of the it was very interesting when I did a presentation on this, because it was a surprise to the lawyers that they were not in largely in sync with their clients, although a number of them then said to me, well, really, all employment issues are governance problems. And I suppose that's partly true because the board is your employer. At the same time, though, in practical terms, and this is really where Alison Bruin came in, practically speaking, this isn't how the sector works. So, and if you look at the funders' annual reports in terms of allocated and unallocated costs related to legal fees, you'll see the amount of funding that is actually going in to support, in particular, employment and labor lawyers' legal fees. In the BC housing context, it's a significant 7-figure number that is spent on unallocated legal costs. So this is actually part of the reason for this, which is to save everybody money, both the nonprofit and, I would argue by extension, all of the ministries that have nonprofit performing services with which they are connected. Because my hope would be that this is the kind of thing that prevents you running into a situation where you didn't have quick and easy free access to a lawyer, or almost free access to a lawyer. I will say also that for the moment, our Ask a Law Student function is continuing. And we are going to be looking for a volunteer law student come the fall. And one of the parts of the project that is funded and to be done this fall is looking at developing some training for folks all over the province to really get familiar with this the legal self-help, the legal help guides. Years and years of calling it LSOL, people. It's going to take me a while to get used to the legal help guide, but to use them with folks, much as we did with the transition to the Societies Act, because it's my firm belief that most of this information is fairly easy to grasp, and you just need a little bit of a boost to get past some of the wording, some of the language you don't understand, and some of the concepts that you need help with. And I'm really hoping that we can develop over the next half year people that are interested in having us out to their communities, whether virtually or otherwise, to talk about whether it's privacy, employment, Societies Act, or record keeping, to support the use of the Law for Nonprofits Legal Help at Your Fingertips digital platform.
Thanks, Martha. Not seeing any further questions at the moment. One just comment to you, Martha, someone who says exactly right, the costs related to HR on behalf of the nonprofit organizations, especially since the health-related challenges of recent has been both unexpected and unbudgeted.
Yeah. It's interesting to note that in some contexts, there have been cost of living increases. Some funders have automatically done that. However, it's not across the board, as we know. And the reality is all of us, and we're looking at federally fiscal restraint. There's a significant restraint coming federally. I fully expect it to come provincially, though who knows what will happen before the election.
we won't go down that whole rabbit hole, maybe. Martha, are there other sort of next steps or looking ahead, any information that you want to share? And just a last opportunity for those on the line to, if you do have further questions specifically about this legal tool, please, we've got a last little bit of time.
If any of you have contacts or connections with members of the legislature who you think would be receptive to a conversation about this resource, that would be enormously helpful. Also, any individuals, that we have 73 umbrella groups. I'd be happy to present to any of them. We're going to have a little team. Sheldon Falk is coming back for 10 weeks over the summer to support us in this. He's been with us as he started as the first content lead. He's just become a lawyer, and the more we know about what the needs are, and please identify yourselves to me directly, legal director at pacificlegaloutreach.com, if you're interested in being a champion in your community, because personally, I think the future of this tool and other kinds of tools is really in the community. It's with you folks that consider yourselves governance wonks, like, hey, Mark Friesen, this is for you. And if you wanted to be a champion in your space, this would be a great time to be working out what that could look like. Because the more it's used, the better it looks for raising funds to continue to support it. Yes, Mark, putting you on the spot. And I know we have a few minutes. I am here, so anybody have a burning question? Don't all talk at once. Maria's going to keep track. But seriously, if there's a burning question that brought you here today, we've got 10 whole minutes, 9 minutes now.
Yeah, I'll keep
Legal
an eye.
direct- Yeah.
We'll definitely get the email address into the chat in just a moment. But yeah, please, if anybody wants to unmute, you're also welcome to do that.
Maybe put up your hand.
Yep. And I thought, if there's somebody that's got sort of a current conundrum that you would like to see how it would look to work through the tool, sort of mini case study. Okay, here's a burning question. What are the fundamental elements of a contract that I require to include in each contract with service providers whom I hire?
Well, now, aren't you asking the questions? I'm going to have two responses. And this may seem a little outside of your area. It would be helpful, TF, if you could say what your subsector or sector is. The artistlegaloutreach.com website has a whole series of FAQs that were developed for the Performing Artists Legal Clinic, which was a short-term pilot project funded by Canadian Heritage. And in there, you will find extensive FAQs about contracts, what has to be in a contract. It's a contracts 101, if you will. It's interesting you ask that. I don't think that we've encountered that in this context. However, I'm thinking it might go well with a due diligence kind of module, Carol. But the other thing is in the employment modules, if we go to those, if somebody can go to those. And yeah, I kind of need to know what your domain is, TF. Like, is it arts? Is it, there's a lot of different ways of answering this. We do have an assessment about employment contracts, what should be there. Also, the question of whether a person should be hired as a contractor within the meaning of the Income Tax Act, or an employee within the meaning of the BC Employment Standards Act and the Income Tax Act. So you can learn a fair bit from this about hiring people. And we start with hiring readiness because we think it's really important to understand what you're getting yourselves into if this is something that you're just starting to do. So again, and one of the things we do is explain the difference between a contract and an agreement. They are the same. They have to have the same elements. It's just another word to describe a contract. Just because you have a contract with someone doesn't mean they are a contractor within the meaning of income tax based on the fourfold test. Always is the issue. So I encourage you to go to our employment modules, and also to get into the sort of what constitutes a contract legally, a meeting of the minds, an exchange, money for the employment, so an exchange of funds, often, and various other provisions.
Martha, TF was just clarifying writing contracts, including short-term rentals of space. I don't know if there's anything different you would say
One
there.
thing, well, have a look at the FAQs on contracts, because there are basic requirements in a contract that I think we deal with more there. Rentals of spaces, yes, that's an area that I appreciate. and we don't really deal with that in this context.
Thanks,
So,
Martha.
thanks for mentioning
Just one state or kind of a sharing point is just somebody who's noting that the main thing they've consulted a lawyer about in the past is staff agreements and contracts. So all relevant to what you've been sharing. There is a question that's more kind of oriented towards advice, I guess. And this will be our last one. If a current employee who's worked there for 4 years wants to relocate out of province and work remotely, can you do a new employment contract and make that remote condition a trial basis and not continue employment without repercussions if the trial period does not work out for the organization?
So, Peter, you should get legal advice on this point, which I'm sure you already know. And the answer to that question, in part, is change the contract. And this is also really important. I think this question is interesting because we are dealing with new situations since the arrival of COVID-19. And just because you signed a 3-year agreement with someone doesn't mean that you as the employer don't have the right to open up that agreement. You will have to get their agreement on new terms and conditions, and you could be subject to liability if you have a contract that you're not abiding by, if there's some provision in there that you don't come to a meeting of the minds. So there's obviously a risk there. At the same time, people sometimes are very afraid of changing things when things change, like the templates, especially, in the world that I occupy sometimes is public art, and big institutions don't want to change their contracts, which I genuinely don't. I understand on one level they like boilerplates, but on another level, I'm like, contract is an evolving document. And things change, as we've discovered since COVID arrived. So let's be open to the possibility of a new conversation with our employers, particularly in the nonprofit world, where many of us are here not for the money. We're here because we really support the mission, vision, and values of the organization. And a number of you I know are from organizations that you yourself started, right? So who knows better than you what you need to, the values that underlie this, and be open to the possibility that you can have a good conversation with someone, and that they will, if they're interested in staying around, especially somebody who's been there for a number of years, and if you're interested in keeping them, it's a negotiation. And you can put just about anything in a contract. Well, unless it's contrary to public policy, which would make it unenforceable. But that's a whole other ball of wax, which, maybe if you want me to do a contracts 101 this fall, I could do one. Let Maria know, because that might be something I've done them in the arts context, but I could do them more generically, and Carol could probably do this with her eyes closed, because she teaches, among other things, business law.
Thank you so much, Martha and Carol. We are at 1 o'clock. We've lost a few folks already, but thanks to all of you who've hung in with your questions and curiosities. I'm taking note on that possibility of a relevant workshop topic or lunch and learn topic. Thank you, Martha, Carol. Any last closing comments? Or if not, we'll wish everybody well and look out for the recording and follow-up resources to come via email.
For those of you who are left, we are a registered charity. And if you're interested in the future of this digital platform, feel free to donate through Canada Helps.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, everyone. Take good care out there.
Bye. Thank you, Maria
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Maria.
and Sam.